Good evening. Our campaign is to persuade the government to remove subsidies for bioelectricity, which simply means burning biofuels or wood chips to produce that energy. Now, what is the link here? One of the challenges with bioenergy is it came about in order to protect us or to try to mitigate the issues on climate change. Now, without going through the numbers, I think this visual helps us to see quite graphically just how much, for example, ice cover has been lost from the Arctic in the period from '79 to 2003. You can see the recession of that ice. But what worries scientists is just how much faster it has receded in the 4 years between 2003 and 2007. And the challenge that we're facing now is that when you look at a number of different climate feedbacks, whether you're looking at the melting of permafrost, ice, or whether you're looking at the acidification of oceans, we're starting to see increases in the rate of degradation. And scientists come together and start to investigate this, and one of the messages coming clearly is that every year is starting to make a difference. So the challenge we face is, how do we keep carbon in fossil fuels in the ground and try not to use it? Well, that's one that's been very richly debated. The question I have got for our evening today is looking at why biofuels is seen as something that makes a difference. Because when you look at it a bit more closely, turning forests, particularly tropical forests, into plantations for bioenergy is probably one of the most destructive things we can do. They are relatively stable forms of carbon, and the last thing you really want to do is to turn that stable carbon into atmospheric CO2 and exacerbate the whole warming process. And this is what it looks like. We've got palm oil plantations on the right, eucalyptus plantations in the centre, which would be used for wood chip burning. This is a concession that was given just this year. It's a very regular event, actually. Every week or two we hear of large concessions, meaning hundreds of thousands of hectares. This one in Sarawak for 1 million hectares, land belonging to the Penang people and actually protected under Malaysian law for the Penang people, but given by the head of the Sarawak for a logging concession. And we just heard this week that the Penang were to be moved into palm oil plantations as their new home. Well, what does this mean? A peer-reviewed study published in Science magazine last year showed that if you look at the black area, the unmanaged forest, which we could describe as the natural forest, we see it almost completely diminishing to zero by 2050, and in its place, bioenergy crops making up that difference. So we have a real challenge. The world would look quite different in biodiversity terms by 2050, but in climate terms, as I've already hinted, we could see accelerating climate feedbacks much more quickly. Well, there are a number of realities to do with turning natural habitats into bioenergy crops. One of the challenges with burning biomass specifically is that it actually produces 50% more CO2 than burning coal. So it actually doesn't even make sense at the point of burning, even if you ignore all the direct impacts on forests and the indirect impacts. If you look at the knock-on degradation from displacement of, let's say, communities out of forest into other lands or grazing into natural habitats. Well, what's actually driving this? The incentives come from government. It's called the Renewable Obligation Certificates. And one of the challenges is, according to the banding, you get twice as much subsidies for producing a dirty biomass power station than you would for producing onshore wind electricity. Now, the onshore wind electricity would be entirely green. It would be something that we would encourage. The biomass power generation is just a very quick way of saying we're doing something about climate change when actually we're exacerbating the problem. In the UK, we produce just about 10 million tonnes of biomass a year. Now that's only 20% of our needs. We actually use 50 million tonnes if you add up the paper, pulp and wood needs. But what we're doing is the government is incentivising another 50 to 60 million tonnes. And of course, where will that come from? Inevitably, it will come from abroad, and that's why we're seeing the 31 or so new biomass power station applications all situated around the British coasts. So clearly it's going to be import related, and the countries that will be most affected will be countries in the global south, but of course on paper what they'd like to say is it's going to come from the US, it's going to come from Russia, it's going to come from Scandinavia. Indeed, some of that is true, but we're already starting to see large contracts being signed in Brazil, in the Congo Basin, in Guyana, all to produce wood chip and wood pellets for the UK in order for us to say that we're meeting our renewable energy targets. This campaign will have a number of different objectives, but it will run anyway. The question what we'd like to do is actually deepen the campaign and take it further. Now, with the funding that we could receive this evening, what we would do is we'd undertake to create a public meeting. That would be a conference-style activity where we would bring together civil society organisations, NGOs, organisations with a particular emphasis on social justice, and we'll raise the issues particularly around indigenous peoples being moved out of their forest homes and the destruction of biodiversity. We'll be looking at building an email alert, which we hope to get 10,000 signatures for. We will produce about, we'll use our list within Biofuelwatch, which is about 3,000, and we'll combine with other lists with other organisations if we're successful in the public meeting, but that's something we have been successful with in the past. We'll be looking to influence policymakers wherever possible and start to bring some of these messages into the media. Thank you.